Our goals today are to sort of, I'm going to walk you through a broad set of resources and tools to help you assess yourself on the four main elements of the med school or dental school application. Oh, if I could get, that would be the one last thing I would love to know would be if people could drop in the chat if they are med or dental, that would be useful to me. Thanks, Julia, for getting it started. We're going to talk about talking to your letter writers. We are going to talk about how to develop a realistic plan moving forward. Self-assessment is only as valuable as you are willing to kind of confront it and make adjustments. And then we'll talk about resources that are available and share some in the chat. So it looks like we are mostly med with one dental so far. Okay, thanks everybody, I appreciate it. Oh, a couple dentals, great. Okay, so we're kind of starting here with sort of what goes into being a competitive application, a competitive candidate. And I look at them as being along two different parameters. You have sort of your quantitative parameters. So all of your metrics in terms of grade point average, overall, science grade point average, and then your big test score, if it's the MCAT or if it's the DAT. Those are our quantitative elements of competitiveness. And those ones are pretty easy to assess because we can get a measured data point, right? And we can compare it to a list of other schools, of other applicants, and use that to really drive some of the way you think about how you go through the process. The qualitative is absolutely more challenging. And this is why I think a lot of pre-health students tend to ask questions about their extracurriculars in the sense of, does it count? What I'm going to challenge you to do is move into a more descriptive than yes or no. We'll also talk about letters of evaluation and personal statement. A little note about well, we actually really won't talk about personal statement. A little note about that. The personal statement is the kind of thing that can help you stand out, but is not, it is, again, it's an ability of your ability. It is reflective of your ability to think about your growth and development, think about your motivations, and provide evidence of them. You can absolutely get through an application cycle with a solid, but not the world's best literature ever, personal statement. We do run workshops on personal statements. They're posted on the Pre-Med and Health Science Center website, and they will, that's a great tool to help you kind of get the brainstorming started for that piece of this process. Now, looking at thinking about your quantitative data. We've got a couple of pieces of information for you. This is, the first one is from the AAMC. This is on the screen. I'm dropping a link in the chat so that you can pull this up whenever you want. I've also got kind of a summary, similar summary for dental. And what we're trying to share here is an understanding of the combination of GPA and test score that might make you more or less competitive. I love the AAMC because it uses a grid that combines both your test score, it compares the test score here to grade point average. So you can look at, what your data might look like if you are a slightly lower GPA, slightly higher MCAT. Dental isn't quite as useful. I'll see if I can share it here. Hopefully you can see that. It doesn't combine the two, they're in two separate charts. But again, it's giving us a sense of what your grade point average is. And this is, so applicants in this consideration is, everyone who applied, whether or not they were realistic. First time, first year enrollees is your realistic numbers, right? So if I'm working with a student who's in this range, sort of 3.0, 3.24 pre-dental student for a science GPA, of those students, only 14% of people who applied with that kind of number got in. So that gives you sort of your science versus your overall. Similarly, on the med side, if I'm looking at a student who is here in this sort of range of numbers, this 3.6 to 3.79, I can see all the way across, what their acceptance percentage is, especially when we cross it with their MCAT scores. I really like students to be in a place where we know that their MCAT score or DAT score and GPA will move them, make them sort of in that at least 50th percentile or 50th percentage points of application. If you can get your numbers to do half of the work for you, then you can really have an opportunity to talk about all of the other really important things. Where it is very, very challenging sometimes is if candidates are maybe in a lower tier or lower quartile of the quantitative data. And if you find yourself saying, if, I know my numbers are a little low, but once they meet me, they will, they're going to be so impressed by all this other stuff I've done, by your research or your volunteer work or your service. What's hard, and I think what is really important to recognize, is this quantitative data, your statistics, are the first thing they're sorting on. And this is maybe one of the first places that they're going to be deciding who they do and do not want to interview. So it's really important to be honest with yourself about where your data is, where your data points are. In this office, we absolutely believe that all of the students we work with could have the potential to get admitted, but a lot of that comes from understanding whether or not you're really competitive going into an application cycle. Okay. So on the sort of self-assessment resource, one of the questions I want you to really ask yourself as you think about this is, is assessing kind of your grade point average science, your grade point average overall, and your test scores. And are they at least at the numbers that I've kind of indicated on that tool? Does that make sense? I hope. Because it's important to be honest with yourself. We can absolutely make a plan for success. You just got to be clear with where you are as you plan to apply. I think it's also important to notice that as you look at this, schools are sort of lumping scores together, right? So it's not the difference between a 3.6 on this particular sample and the difference and a 3.75. Schools, as they report out this data, are kind of looking at those students in the same general grouping. And if you look way up in this top corner, and you'll see this is true for all health sciences, there is never a time when your numbers are doing all the work, right? So these are students who have exceptional grade point averages, right? They're a 3.8 to a 4.0, so they're A students. They've got a very, very high standardized test score, and 83% of them get in. That means 17% didn't, because they were missing something else in the more qualitative measures. Neat. Yeah. So that kind of moves from this conversation. And obviously, if you want to talk a little bit more about the specifics of numbers in your particular situation, that's a great thing to bring up in an advising appointment with me or Amanda. So if we recognize that numbers are going to do some of the work and they're going to do a really important part of the work, I think it's important. We want to know what have you got besides being smart? Right? Plenty of smart people. Not everybody's going to make it into professional health sciences. That's where this qualitative piece starts to matter. So if you've been working with me and Amanda, working with our office, we've probably been talking to you since day one about the importance of spending time outside the classroom on your own development. We've probably also asked you to keep track of the things that you do with your time. And hopefully we've also encouraged you to consider all the things you spend time on, not just the things that appear to be pre-med or pre-dental off the top of your head. But this would be including things like family responsibilities, involvement in a religious organization, really anything you've spent time on could potentially go into this. All right. So what's the goal of this qualitative data, your work and activities? Sharing this information with admissions committees does two things for you. First of all, it shows your commitment and understanding of the profession you're trying to join. But secondly, it also is an opportunity for you to reflect on your self-development and to share that reflection with admissions committees. It is where you're going to find the evidence to support your why. Your entire application is basically a statement or an essay of a sort, an argument for why you should be admitted to medical or dental school. Work and activities, experiences is where you have the proof of your statement that the medical school or dental school should accept you. All right. Do you need to, okay, Lindsay, great question. The question is, do we need to get an experience in each of these? So I would say, well, so no. Particularly AMCAS, if you're medical, there's 15 experience categories, and there's I think that there's 15 or 16 different types or labels. These are the labels. AMCAS, you get 15 spaces to write about your work and activities and then apply these labels. The DO application has unlimited number of spaces, but a lot fewer labels, which actually I think makes it easier. And then ADSAS, similar to ACOMAS, has unlimited spaces, but it's sorting the activities and the labels in a different way because it's really got this focus on dental experience and dental shadowing. Okay. So the big thing is, and again, as we work on applications with students, I think it's important to understand there absolutely has to be some sort of healthcare or medical or dental component. And it needs to be significant enough that you can share perspectives about what you've learned and how it's influenced you with admissions committees. I think it's also interesting to note that you might have activities that could be categorized a variety of ways, right? So if you were doing some, let's say you were involved in a student organization, and you were a general body member of that student org for 2 years, but then in your 3rd year, you were selected for the e-board. You might choose to put that as an extracurricular activity or leadership over here on the AMCAS side. In ACOMAS, you would have extracurricular activity, but again, you might have achievement. And so what we're thinking about is, what was the outcome of my engagement, right? Do I really want to focus on telling the admissions committee about the leadership qualities I developed? Or do we want them is this really, I want to reflect on the things that I learned just through engaging as a general body member, right? So that's where the labels can be useful. And I think when you consider that many of your activities could be labeled one way or the other, you're going to have to make a choice about that, by the way. Nobody's going to tell you how to do it. You got it. That's all user defined. it's less about did you volunteer and more about strategically, what do you want the medical school admissions committee to know about you? How do you want them to understand you as a person? Next question in the chat. How should our time be documented and verified before admission? So this is all self-report. We are assuming that you will have some integrity around this process. And that you will do your best to accurately keep track of the things that you spend time on. The reality is that even though applications get verified by the application processors, nobody has time to check 10 to 15 activities for, 30 to 60,000 candidates. So I want you to do your best to keep track of what you do and not stress about it too much, right? So if you usually volunteer someplace 4 hours a week, but 1 week you missed it, or 1 week you were there 3.5 hours instead of 4, or 4.5 hours instead of 4, that's fine. We're looking for averages. We're looking for general numbers, just to your best ability. Does that make sense? So when we consider that these working activities are less about did you do it or not, and more about what did you learn, I have a resource here. Please let me know. You should be able to see this, and I'm going to drop it in the chat. These are the core competencies. This is a list of qualities and traits that the American Association of Medical Colleges came up with, or they had a consortium of different medical schools kind of develop this list. This list is great. This list is referenced by health professions admissions committees outside of MD. So dental schools will talk about your core competencies and the qualities you're developing through your work and activities. Our DO schools absolutely agree that these are all important traits. So a good activity for yourself can be kind of comparing your activity tracker, your resume, your CV against these core competencies. I guarantee you that these are also things that schools are asking about in essay questions during interviews. So being able to articulate when and where you've developed a particular strength, when and where you've been challenged, and to share that kind of story leads to a stronger application. So thinking about the self-assessment piece, the questions that I developed to kind of go along with this slide also indicate again, not so much did you do it or not, but they indicate the kinds of things that medical schools and dental schools want to know about your activities. How long did you do it? Have you done, so have you shown that you can commit to something over time and be reliable over time? Have you had a variety of experiences in a variety of environments? Or is your application really relying on healthcare experience in a single location, so that your view of the profession is maybe a little more narrow than it should be? Have you been able to spend time working with people who are experiencing great need? Service and connecting with underserved populations is really important to all of the professional schools in the state of Michigan, regardless of med, dental, MD, DO. So as you look at your resume, is that a place where you have challenged yourself to talk to people who are really struggling, seeing what the challenges are that they're going through, and not do it all through, not have all of your clinical volunteer hours being in a back room sorting something or doing filing, but were you actually talking to the people in need, the people who were receiving the help, or the people who were in crisis? Because again, those skills that develops are much more important. And then the last question on the assessment is sort of, can you look at those competencies that I shared and point out those specific instances of development of experience? Now, through your engagement in the classroom, outside the classroom, in the community, at your home, in your hometown, you've developed some professional relationships. Now, professional letters of recommendation or letters of evaluation, they get called both, are an opportunity for admissions committees to learn what other people think of you. Okay. The 5 questions here are frequently ones that Amanda and I ask in one-on-one advising appointments. So thinking about, do you have quality relationships with the mentors, supervisors, more experienced professionals in your world? Would you be comfortable asking for a letter, particularly considering that you are not supposed to see the letter, right? So do you trust this person and have a strong enough relationship that you believe they will speak honestly and on your behalf, even knowing that you're not going to see what they have to say about you? One big thing we really want you to remember is that their title or the position that they hold is less important than the specific things they can say about you. What do I mean by that? I mean that if you are in a project that has a couple of levels of supervision, maybe you work as a CNA and as a result, you spend a lot of time working directly with the nursing staff. And you have the head nurse on your floor has really gotten to know you and really thinks highly of you. And you've also, you have the volunteer coordinator or somebody who works at the hospital who maybe is in a supervisory or directorship position that maybe through your parents, and maybe has a more impressive title. Schools would much rather see the letter from the person who's interacting with you every day, who can say, this student really goes out of their way to support, people who are in pain and struggling. This person really goes out of their way to make sure that they are being respectful, that they are practicing good communication skills. And then maybe they can share a story about a time when you really were made a difference in an intervention with someone. So we want the majority of your letters to be able to have those kinds of stories and evidence in them. And then finally, and this is almost more dental these days than it is med, is there a single box checking letter? Meaning, as you look at the requirements for the schools you plan to apply to, do they have some sort of very specific requirement about science letters? And if so, is there somebody you can reach out to? And that is really because, you may have a school that you find that you're really interested in, that you think you'd be a good fit for. They have some sort of one funky letter of requirement that they have to have for you to successfully move through the process. We don't want that to hold you up, right? So is there somebody who you could network with a little bit in the 6 months leading up to application and then get that person to submit a letter, understanding that it's not going to be your strongest letter, and maybe depending on the portfolio or the platform you're in, maybe you are sending it to some faculty members or some admissions committees, but not all. Okay, the question in the chat, if I got a letter of rec from the PI in my research lab and he's a professor in something science, would that count as the requirements of? Okay, so great question, Lindsay. Thank you. A science letter is something very specific. Science letter means bio, chemistry, or physics. And it means someone who taught you in a class where they gave you a grade relative to other students. So a biology professor that you took, big class, you got a good grade, they write you a letter. That certainly counts as science. Research lab, when we're talking about the specific situation in that your question, my questions would be, did you take, you say he's a professor in something science. So did you take that science class with him? And then from there, joined his research lab? Then yes, that would be a great letter. It would absolutely check the box for a science letter. And it would probably have a lot of more of those inter and intrapersonal competencies in it. But if they're a bio professor and you didn't have them for a class, then it's not going to be a science letter. Also, like this is always kills students. Neuro is not considered a science for these purposes. Nutrition is not considered a science for this purpose. What are some other ones that come up? Engineering is not a science according to this. So yeah. So that can be, again, that's one of the really nuanced things that maybe make a difference when you are actually getting your school list together and you look at their requirements and you say, do I have these requirements or not? And I will add, that's another piece of being a competitive candidate is really looking at those lists and saying, do I really have this, or am I just putting them down because I hope that it's not a real rule that they're looking for? Because remember, again, depending on the school, we're talking about programs trying to go from let's say like 5,000 or 6,000 applicants up to 10 to 12,000 applicants. They're trying to get that giant pool of people down to a manageable number. So if you're applying to schools where you haven't met their minimums, you're automatically going to get, they have no real compelling reason to look at your application. So that sort of attention to detail as you put together your school list can be really important. If you say no, these questions on the board, if you say no to any of these questions in your head, you may not be ready to apply. You may need an extra year to really develop some of these strong relationships to have that support to go into an application cycle. Talking to letter writers can be intimidating and difficult. So we threw together some tips for you. The AAMC has done a great job. Again, they have so many good resources. I don't care what health profession you're interested in, their resources are the best. So I'm throwing there, they have a guidelines to writing letters of evaluation. That can be a nice thing to provide to your letter writers when you talk to them, because especially someone who maybe has less experience writing letters of evaluation, it helps them understand what should and should not go into the letter. We want the letter to focus on you as a candidate, not on the individual or the individual's organization or the hospital that they work at. It really needs to have some good substantive stuff about you, and the guide kind of walks them through that. We always suggest asking in person, particularly post-COVID. People still are having a hard time knowing faces, whatever, but asking in person shows that you take this seriously, that it's worth your time to a face-to-face ask, to do the uncomfortable thing. And it also shows that you don't need to, you're not just sending a BCC email to a bunch of people, right? You've taken the time to go out of your way to make this connection. I always recommend that you spend some time before talking to your letter writers, thinking about what are the things I think I have exhibited in this particular setting. Is it a capacity for improvement? Is it, excellent teamwork skills? And is there an incident where I think I really demonstrated those qualities. And I suggest this for two things. One, being thoughtful about it can help you really be sure that the people you're targeting have those things to say about you. But two, if your letter writer says, I am happy to support you, how about you write the letter and I'll sign it? If you have already kind of put together some thoughts about what you're hoping this person would say about you, then you're able to say, really that's not advised by my pre-med advisor or my pre-health advisor. But I did think about some of the times we've interacted, and I kind of put together this list of qualities I think maybe I've exhibited while working with you. This might be a use, I would love to have that you might find this a useful guide as you write this letter. Once you've had that conversation, or again, the other piece of thinking through having this conversation is you need to decide how this letter is going to get stored. Like I said earlier, you are not supposed to see or touch or handle this letter in any way. You will be asked whether or not you waive your rights to see the letter, and for the most part, we're going to recommend you waive your rights. And what that means is this person needs to figure out how to submit the letter to have it attached to your application. So this is something you want to think about. You can do it one of two ways. Each one of the big application services has their own letter submission process. Ooh, I didn't check this link. I hope this link is still good. And oh wait. And each one of, so the MD and the DO and the ADSAS all have ways for you to submit directly into the letter or into your application. But there's also a company called Liaison, and they have a product called the Liaison Help Center. Sorry, my eyes doing one thing and my hands are doing another. Liaison is this Liaison oversees the dental and the DO applications. So that link, this last one I dropped, is useful for both those application portals. And then finally, there is a company called Interfolio that has a product called Dossier. Dossier is got a little more flexibility than the letter writer submitting directly to the application. If you do decide to use Dossier, you can open it at any time. Those letters will save from cycle to cycle. However, it's not free. So there is a charge to use that product. So that's a very personal, individual decision, what works for you. It won't make any difference in your overall competitiveness. You just need to decide which product or which method you want to use. Okay. All right. There are a lot of resources out there for looking at information about the schools you're interested in applying to. The big ones are the Medical School Admissions Requirement Guide, which is put out by the AAMC for all of the MD schools in the US and Canada. It's $28 a year. There is that's here. DO schools have something called Choose DO Explorer. It's okay. It doesn't have nearly the kind of data in it that the MSAR does. And then ADEA, so the American Dental Education Association, has their own official guide. And this is available, I believe, as both a PDF and as a website. And then ultimately, you are also going to use school websites. You're going to use the big tools to evaluate and kind of generate school list. School websites is really where you're going to get more detailed information and maybe make some notes to yourself about why a particular program might be useful. School selection is another important component of competitiveness, right? It's important to be able to, again, articulate and show evidence of why you would be a good fit at a particular school. If you are picking a school that is a high research school, a Johns Hopkins, NYU, but you haven't really done very much research or any research, it's not a good fit. So even if your metrics are high, you've sort of reduced your competitiveness by selecting programs that are interested in things that you don't have on your resume. Similarly, if you have something that you're really passionate about, international medicine is a good example. Michigan State University loves international experiences. So if you have something you're passionate about that's played a big role in your development up to this point, looking for schools that also value those things will help you be more competitive. The medical school admissions resource is kind of a cool thing. Where'd it go? I brought it up. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. All right. So I'm going to show you real quick. It's much more. It's a great tool. I'm logged in because I have a membership. You can sort by a lot of things, but I'll show you some of the tips and tricks that I find most useful about this. I don't necessarily know application deadlines. We'll talk about that in a minute. Class size could be important. Certainly, one of the things we know is that you are going to be most competitive at the schools in your home state. But also, if you're looking out of state, public versus private, and this is true for MD, DO, and dental. If you're applying out of state, looking highly at private schools or public schools that admit, 40 to 60% out of state students will help you be more competitive. Also, just as a side note, refining your school list is something we can do later in the application process, but I wanted to spend some time on it because within the context of a competitive application, it's an important component. A couple things I wanted to show you though about this particular program. I'm just going to pull up the schools in the state of Michigan. Maybe you've already seen this, but what I like here is that it gets you a landing page. You're going to have all 7 school or the six MD schools drop on one page. And you can look at some different aspects of each of them. I'm going to go ahead and look at Central Michigan University. Now, under I like their acceptance data. Admissions is going to have details on kind of dates and contact information and stuff, but acceptance data is the piece that's going to help you do the closest comparison of your own metrics and scores to the ones of the schools you're looking at. Okay. It separates MCAT and GPA. What I like to see, so you'll see here, this is giving you a couple different options about how to look at things. You can look at the national data, in-state versus out-of-state, and matriculated. I like, especially for the middle of the road schools, I like looking at matriculated. So one of the reasons I like that is when we look at all accepted applicants, that is literally anybody they made an offer to. Okay. We know that not all the accepted applicants attended this medical school. Matriculated students get you a lot closer to the actual class profile. So the people who are actually attending that institution. Okay. And then there can be a difference between in-state versus out-of-state depending on the school. But right now, I'm going to look at all matriculated because that's the class profile for CMU. Within that, I love this. It's not a bar and whisker, but it's similar, right? Because I can see the median. This is if you're looking on, if it's gonna give you a you might see an average MCAT score of 507. And that's lovely. But what I really like is looking at the ranges, the percentile range. The 10th to 90th is the light blue, and then the 25th to 75th. Applying to schools where you are in this bright blue bubble or the dark blue bubble is important. I don't want you to be an outlier at the majority of schools you apply to. So you can look at that data for MCAT scores. I don't dig into the sections, look at that, and then you can look at it for GPA as well. So again, one of the things that you might notice here is that Central Michigan has a really wide 25th to 75th percentile range, right? A 3.21 all the way up to a 3.82. If you compare that to say, go to the top, if you compare that to a Wayne. Under their acceptance data, and I look at their matriculated students, you can see it looks very different, right? Their 10th to 90th is a much broader range than Central Michigan's were. Their median score is a lot higher, but there's also their 25th to 75th is very tightly packed around this 512. So for you to be a realistic candidate at Wayne in this particular class, you really wanted to be at least at a 510. Same thing when we look at their GPA, we can see that their range of science GPA for matriculated students is much narrower and a little bit higher. So that's where kind of, again, being realistic with yourself. Yes, there's absolutely people down here in the 10th to 25th percentile who got into Wayne State School of Medicine, but I want most of your schools, I want you to be pretty close into that 25th to 75th percentile, just because it's going to improve your odds of getting admitted someplace. Yeah, okay. So this is where, once you've kind of done that piece, double checking your fit, right? So if we look at a school like, sometimes students will just search on maybe median MCAT scores. So I'm gonna put your medians like a 505 to a 514, let's say. And I'm taking Michigan out of that. And I want to see a median GPA, let's say, of a 3.4 to a 4.7 or a 3.7. What comes up? Not a lot. So, oh, here we go. This is a great one. Okay. So you might be like, oh, I got a 508. My median GPA, I'm around a 3.6. This is awesome. So then you're going to click on the school and you're going to look at what is their philosophy? Who are they looking to train? Am I a good fit from them from that standpoint? So I start with the mission statement typically. Increase supply of primary care physicians serving the state, improve the health status of North Carolina's citizens, and enhance access of minority and disadvantaged students to medical education. So one of the things that jumps out here is they are real focused on North Carolina, right? Which also prompts me to look at kind of what their acceptance data looks like on their, because you can actually look and see how many students matriculated, so you can see their interviews. They only had 3 people apply from out of state. They didn't interview anybody from out of state. They didn't admit anybody from out of state. So so even though your statistics might be a match for them, you're not a fit for their school. So that's what I mean by kind of developing and understanding that fit is an important aspect of application. Okay. That's some pretty high level thinking right there, by the way. Again, great things to dig into in our application work sessions when we get there, and in one-on-one appointments, and to help work with us to kind of develop a strategy to improve around some of those things. Why do we care so much that you're going to spend the time to do this? Because it's expensive. This is real expensive. It's less than it used to be. But this is the 2022-23 pricing and what it looks like to apply. So we haven't seen the updated information on the 23-24 cycle. Okay, but I can tell you that MD schools, average candidates are applying 18 to 20 schools. Dental schools, it's not that many, it's more like 12. But you can see from here that the actual cost of application per application is significantly higher. Their secondaries are significantly higher. You get, oh, I forgot to update the data on this. It says MCAT 320. It's 330 this year. Sorry. The DAT is ridiculous. The DAT is 525. I think that includes 8 score reports. Oh, no. So 525 includes sending a score report to any school you indicate when you register for the test or when you sit down to take the test. The additional $50 per report is if you decide after getting your score that you're applying to X, Y, and Z schools that you didn't think about before. Another added expense that's kind of newer in this is online situational judgment tests. You may have heard of Altius or Casper. You may have heard of the AAMC preview. These are sort of virtual interviews that are recorded and are assessed by independent companies or third-party vendors, and then forwarded to your medical or dental school. It's expensive. We did create a list and for the schools in the state of Michigan, who's using what test. If you are applying to a school that's requiring Altius or the AAMC preview, then you need to plan to schedule that test somewhere in the summer. Usually July is usually a good month to target, but you really want to know which schools you're applying to so you know whether or not you need to spend the money. Interviews, travel, and prep. So this is one place where it's gotten less expensive. The continuing use of virtual interviews has made it much more manageable for students to kind of handle the expense of this. Certainly you still need to look sharp. You need a suit that maybe is going to look good on camera. You want to be clean and tidy, maybe a new haircut. But you don't have to travel. You don't have to stay in a hotel, buy a plane ticket, get on a train, any of that. And then ultimately the deposits, which anywhere from $100 to $2,000, depending on where you get admitted. So this is extremely expensive. The other cost that's not reflected in here is sort of the emotional cost, because it's very, very stressful. So our goal is that when you are ready, when you apply, it's because you're as ready as you want to be. The question from Lindsay: when pre-meds apply, can they apply to MD and DO schools in the same cycle? Yes. And that means you're filling out a primary application for MD and spending that $175 on that $170 on that portal. And you're applying in the DO portal and spending the $198 in that portal. So that's another way that it kind of gets more expensive. We do send a lot of students to Michigan State's College of Osteopathic Medicine. They actually are going to come present to us on the 17th of this month. So many of our students are applying both places. Okay, putting this all together, just to give you an overview of timing. All right. We want you to hit submit when you're early in the cycle and you have all of your pieces lined up, ready to go. So you can see this is just a general overview. We did include the dates. What we call the MD application will be the 2024 AMCAS application so it's for the entering class of 2024. And then the ADSAS, so the dental application for 2023-24, we have the dates for that. We do not have the DO dates yet, but if you wanted to grab a screenshot of something or something of this, or actually I'm gonna post this video. So, but you get a sense of, you know, the sort of time ranges that we would really like to see you applying. Technically, you know, schools absolutely will allow you to file a primary application later into, you know, usually into the fall. But we know that being early in the process impacts your competitiveness. So we want you to be in a position to be early in the cycle with metrics that have you competitive, with a well-written, well-articulated application that really speaks to your breadth, depth, and commitment to your professional field, that you have strong letters of support being submitted on your behalf, and that you are ready to spend the time and money all summer to stay on top of this process. It's a lot. So thinking about this, maybe going through that self-assessment tool, maybe going through this presentation again, because it is so much data. If you decide you're applying for this upcoming cycle, two important next steps. Begin researching your letter storage options and make a decision about what's going to work for you. And then consider attending some additional workshops like personal statements, pre-writing your work and activities, and the application overview. We do a separate MD versus MD. We do a separate medical versus dental for that one because the ins and outs of the application system are different. If you've taken some of this information in and you feel like you are not as strong as you want to be, know that there is a really great resource from MSU College of Human Medicine, which helps. It does sort of a deeper dive into a lot of these topics we were just talking about. It is here. So just drop that in the chat. It's an excellent self-assessment guide. And I would highly encourage if you've got some questions about kind of whether or not this is a good next step for you, kind of going through that page by page and being honest, to sort of help you make the best choice possible. I also think that self-assessment form, or even just this presentation, is a great opportunity to identify one area to improve on this semester. It's all about demonstrating growth, reflecting on growth, sharing growth. No matter what, keep reading the newsletter for further events, for opportunities to connect with admissions people, and follow us at WSU Pre-Health to connect to more resources. And then we are certainly here to talk this through with you, to plan next steps, to help you kind of tweak all of this general information I just threw at you to your own individual circumstance. stars.wayne.edu as always, or Amanda and I both have it posted in our replies under our signatures, and you can find it on the wayne.edu/advising/prehealth website. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.